Chapter 1. The Girl Who Forgot How to Dream. The scent of roasted boar and spiced wine was a thick, sweet poison in the air. It clung to the tapestries, seeped into the stone, and promised a warmth Arya Vale would never feel. From her corner, scrubbing a stubborn stain from the flagstones, the great hall of the Black Moon Pack was a galaxy of distant, glittering stars. Laughter, sharp and bright as splintered ice, echoed off the high, timbered ceiling. Jewels flashed on pale throats and strong wrists. These were the wolves who ruled her world, the nobles, the warriors, the chosen. And she was the dust mote dancing in their sunbeam, visible only when she failed to disappear. Her knuckles were raw against the cold stone, the lye soap biting into small cuts. She kept her head down, her world shrinking to the circular motion of her brush. To be unseen, to be unheard, to be forgotten. These were the first lessons her mother had taught her. They were lessons learned in shadows and paid for with tears, because survival in a pack that had rejected you was a currency of silence. A sharp laugh, louder than the others, pierced her concentration. Lady Seraphina, her gown the color of blood, gestured with a wine goblet toward the high table. "Look at him," she purred, her voice carrying in a lull. "Our glorious Alpha. So strong. So alone. A wolf without a mate is a walking wound. He needs a Luna to temper that rage." A younger lord, his hair a perfect golden mane, snorted. "He'll never take a true mate. Not after—" He cut himself off, but the space he left was filled with whispers. Arya's stomach tightened. She knew the stories. Every pup knew the story of the blood moon curse, of the Alpha's first mate, and of the beast that lived inside Daemon Kale. A beast he kept chained in a cage of pure control. Then, Seraphina's cold gaze drifted, sweeping the hall before landing somewhere near Arya's corner. "He certainly won't be choosing from the dregs. Remember that servant girl? The one with the wild eyes? Her mother thought she could be Luna too." The words struck Arya like a physical blow. Her breath hitched. They were talking about her mother. A woman who was a ghost, a forbidden name, a Luna rejected and cast out. A woman who died protecting her daughter from the pack's casual cruelty. The memory was a hot, jagged thing in her chest. Fury propelled her scrubbing, the brush scraping viciously against the floor. Don't react. Don't look. Don't exist. She was invisible, and that was her only shield. But did a shield have to feel so much like a cage? Her own scent, soap, sweat, and something else, something wild she always tried to suppress, must have drifted on a stray current. Because across the vast hall, at the head of the impossibly long table, Alpha Daemon Kale went still. His head, which had been bowed over a goblet, lifted slowly. His eyes, they were a piercing, unnatural gold, and they scanned the room with a predator's focus. They passed over lords and ladies, over guards and servants, and then they stopped. They stopped on her. Arya froze, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He couldn't see her. He shouldn't see her. She was nothing. Less than nothing. But he was staring right at her. His nostrils flared, just once. And then, from the chest of the most controlled, most disciplined Alpha in living memory, a sound escaped. It wasn't a word. It was a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the stone floor and straight into her bones. A sound of raw, possessive fury that silenced the entire hall. The impossible sound was a question, a claim, and a threat. And it was aimed directly at the girl who had forgotten how to dream. Chapter 2. Summoned by the Alpha. The sudden silence that followed the Alpha's growl was heavier than any noise. It pressed down on Arya, suffocating her. Every eye in the great hall swiveled, first to the frozen Alpha, and then, following his burning gaze, to her. To the servant girl on her knees with a scrub brush in her hand. In that one moment, her cloak of invisibility was ripped away and set on fire. She was exposed, raw, and terrified. She wanted to run, to burrow into the earth and disappear, but her limbs were locked in place by 100 pairs of shocked, hostile eyes. Subsequently, the alpha's beta, a hulking wolf named Riker, with a perpetually sneering face, broke the spell. He shoved back from the table, his chair screeching in protest. "You!" he barked, his finger pointing directly at Arya. "What did you do?" Arya could only shake her head, her throat too tight for words. What had she done? She had existed. In this pack, for her, that was a crime. "She has sullied the Alpha's feast with her presence," someone hissed from a nearby table. "Insolent cur," another added. Riker stalked toward her, his heavy boots thudding a rhythm of doom on the stone. "The Alpha is disturbed, and it's your fault." He loomed over her, a mountain of muscle and menace. "On your feet, you're coming with me, now." Two guards flanked him, their expressions grim. They hauled Arya up, their fingers digging into her arms like talons. She didn't fight. To struggle was to admit guilt. To scream was to invite more pain. Instead, she lifted her chin, meeting Riker's glare with a defiance that felt like swallowing hot coals. This small act of rebellion was all she had left. He saw it, and his sneer deepened. The walk from the Great Hall to the Alpha's private study was the longest of her life. They dragged her through cold, empty corridors, her worn shoes scuffing against polished stone. The distant sounds of the feast faded, replaced by the thudding of her own heart. When they arrived, Riker shoved the heavy oak door open without knocking. "Alpha, the girl." The study was a cage of shadows and silence. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of ancient leather-bound tomes. A fire slept in the hearth, its embers glowing like watchful eyes. And behind a massive desk carved from the heart of a petrified ironwood tree sat Alpha Damon Kale. He wasn't looking at them. He was staring out a tall, arched window at the moonlit forest, his hands clasped behind his back. His stillness was terrifying. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. "Leave us," he said. The words were quiet, but they held the power of a command that could not be disobeyed. Riker hesitated. "Alpha, she... now." The single word cracked like a whip. Riker and the guards backed out of the room, pulling the door shut with a heavy thud that sealed Arya inside. She was alone with the monster from the stories. Her every instinct screamed at her to cower, to beg, to make herself small. But the memory of her mother's broken body and the echo of the noble's mockery hardened her spine. She would not give him her fear. She stood straight, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. He didn't turn. For a long, torturous minute, the only sound was the faint crackle of the embers. "You defied my beta," he finally stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to come from the very earth beneath them. "He gave you an order, and your eyes told him no." "Why?" Arya's own voice was surprisingly steady when it came. "He looked at me like I was dirt. I will not bow to a man who sees me as less than a wolf." A flicker of something, surprise, interest, disturbed his rigid posture. He turned from the window, and for the first time, she saw him clearly. He was younger than she expected, his face a masterpiece of harsh, beautiful lines. But his eyes, they were the molten gold from the hall, swirling with a dangerous light. And something else. A deep, profound agony. He was fighting a war inside his own skin, and it was a war he was losing. He took a step toward her, his movements fluid and silent like a panther. The air crackled with a strange energy. "You are not afraid of me?" "I'm terrified," she admitted, the honest words tasting like blood. "But I've been afraid my whole life. I'm tired of it." He stopped just a few feet from her. His gaze was so intense it felt like a physical touch, pinning her in place. He inhaled slowly, his eyes darkening. She saw a muscle jump in his jaw, a fine tremor in his hand. He was fighting himself, fighting the beast within. Then, his lips parted. A word escaped, not in his voice, but in a rasping, guttural whisper that was not entirely human. a voice that seemed to echo from a deeper, wilder place inside of him. Mine. The word hung in the silent room, a shocking, impossible claim that terrified her more than any threat of violence ever could. Chapter 3. The warning in his eyes. The word echoed in the oppressive silence of the study, a phantom sound that made the hairs on Arya's arms stand on end. Mine. It hadn't been a word spoken to her, but a verdict passed upon her. Her mind reeled, searching for a logical explanation. Had she imagined it? Was he toying with her? Or was the Alpha truly as unhinged as the whispers claimed? Before she could process the impossible claim, Damon's expression shifted. The raw, predatory light in his eyes vanished, shuttered away behind a wall of icy control. He blinked, as if waking from a trance, and a flicker of self-loathing crossed his features. Following that brief moment of chaos, he took a step back, putting the massive ironwood desk between them once more. The retreat was a clear signal. The man was back in charge, the beast locked away. "Your defiance is unexpected," he said, his voice once again the clipped, authoritative tone of an alpha. He gestured to the chair opposite his. "Sit." It was an order, not an invitation. Arya moved stiffly, her legs feeling like brittle twigs. She perched on the edge of the plush leather seat, feeling utterly out of place. The chair was worth more than every possession she had ever owned. This sudden shift from raw predator to cold commander was jarring, and it put her even more on edge. What did he want from her? Why spare her only to summon her for this bizarre private audience? He didn't sit. Instead, he prowled the length of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. The restless movement was a stark contrast to his earlier stillness, revealing an agitation he couldn't quite conceal. "My pack is restless," he began, his gaze fixed on the ancient tapestries that depicted great battles between wolves and elemental spirits. The other alphas on the council sense it. They see a leader without a Luna, without an anchor, and they see weakness. They are beginning to circle. Arya remained silent. This was pack politics, the games of power played by the very people who had destroyed her family. It had nothing to do with her. "They are demanding I solidify my position," he continued, his voice tight. "They demand I show unity, strength. They demand I present a Luna at the next full moon gathering." He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his golden eyes boring into her with an unnerving intensity. "A demand I cannot meet. Not in truth." A cold knot of dread formed in Arya's stomach. She was beginning to understand, and she didn't like where this was going. It was all because of the curse, the reason he could never take a true mate. "I require a solution," Damon said, choosing his words with immense care. "A temporary arrangement. I need a Luna in name only. Someone who will stand by my side at feasts and gatherings. Someone who will play the part and quell the unrest. A contract Luna." The air left Arya's lungs in a silent rush. He was insane. He wanted her, the servant girl, the daughter of a rejected Luna. It was a cruel, twisted joke. "Why me?" she whispered, the question feeling foolish as soon as it left her lips. "Because you are perfect," he stated, the words devoid of any warmth. "You are packless in all but name. You have no family to make demands, no political alliances to complicate matters. You are intelligent enough to understand the role, and you are not afraid to look me in the eye. No one else will." He saw the storm of emotions on her face, the shock, the anger, the suspicion. "In return," he added, his voice dropping to a persuasive murmur, "your servitude ends. You will live in the Alpha's wing. You will have clothes, food, protection. And when the political climate has stabilized, the contract will be dissolved. You will be given a handsome sum and the freedom to leave this pack forever." Freedom. The word was a siren's call, a key to a cage she had been locked in her entire life. It was everything she had ever wanted. But this felt like stepping into a different, more dangerous kind of prison, a gilded one. To be that close to him, To the unstable power that radiated from him was a terrifying prospect. But what was her alternative? A lifetime of scrubbing floors, of enduring the scorn of nobles, of sleeping in a cold cot in the servants' quarters until she withered away? Her jaw tightened. I will not be your puppet. I will not be your whore. A humorless smile touched his lips for a fleeting second. The contract will be explicit. The arrangement is for public appearances only. Your chambers will be your own. I will not touch you. The promise sounded more like a vow to himself than to her. He slid a heavy piece of parchment across the polished desk, along with a pen and an inkwell. It was already written. He had been planning this. She stood and walked to the desk, her heart a frantic drum. She read the terms. They were exactly as he'd described: protection, provision, and eventual freedom. All she had to do was wear a pretty mask and stand beside a monster. With a trembling hand, she uncapped the inkwell, dipped the pen, and signed her name. Aria Vale. As she pushed the parchment back toward him, her fingers brushed against his. A jolt, hot and violent as a lightning strike, shot up her arm. Damon recoiled as if he'd been burned, a sharp hiss escaping his lips. His golden eyes flared, the pupils dilating into black pits. She saw the beast surface again, a raw, untamed fury that was 1,000 times more powerful than the growl in the hall. It was a storm of possession, of rage, of a desperate, primal need. He looked at her, at their point of contact, with sheer horror. The warning in his eyes was clear now. The contract was a lie. The real danger wasn't the pack or the politics. It was him. And the wolf inside him had just been awakened. Chapter 4. The Ghost of a Bite. Waking up felt like surfacing from a deep, dark ocean. For a moment, Arya didn't know where she was. The scratchy wool blanket of her servant's cot was gone. The familiar scent of damp stone and shared living was absent. Instead, her skin was cocooned in something impossibly soft. Silk, she realized with a jolt. The air smelled of lavender and old polished wood. Sunlight, thick and golden as honey, poured through a vast window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny sprites. She was in the Alpha's wing, the gilded cage. Pushing herself up, the silk sheet pooled around her waist. The room was larger than the entire servants' barracks. A plush rug the color of cream covered the floor, and a tall, silver-backed mirror stood in one corner, gleaming like a portal to another world. This was her new reality, a consequence of the desperate signature she'd penned the night before. Freedom had a price, and it was sleeping in the heart of the beast's den. It was all because she chose this path, a way out of the bleakness that had defined her existence. A strange, stinging sensation on the side of her neck drew her attention. She raised a hand to the spot, her fingers brushing against tender, slightly raised skin. A bug bite, perhaps? But there was a pattern to the irritation, a faint curve. An unsettling memory from the chaotic moments of the previous night surfaced. The jolt of their touch, the flash of wildness in Damon's eyes. A cold dread, heavy and numbing, began to seep into her veins. She slid out of the massive bed, her bare feet sinking into the luxurious rug, and padded over to the mirror. She had to see. She needed to know. Her reflection was a stranger. Her face was pale, her dark hair a tangled mess around her shoulders, but her eyes were wide with a growing horror. She turned her head, tilting her chin up to catch the light. There, just below her jawline, was the faint, unmistakable outline of a bite. It wasn't a brutal, claiming mark of a true mating. It was softer, almost hesitant, the edges slightly blurred as if it were a ghost of a bite, but the shape was undeniable. 2 perfect crescents, formed by the pressure of canine teeth. A gasp escaped her lips, small and soundless. He had promised. I will not touch you. The words echoed in her mind, a bitter, hollow lie. Had this all been a trick? Was this his true price? To brand her, to own her, to make her his property in secret while pretending it was all a political game? The vulnerability of sleep had been her downfall. Just as a wave of cold fury washed over her, the heavy door to her chamber creaked open. Alpha Damon stood there, dressed in a simple black tunic and trousers. He held a small tray with a steaming cup and a piece of bread. For a heartbeat, he looked almost normal. He opened his mouth to speak, but then his eyes landed on her exposed neck, on the faint violet marks his own teeth had left. All the color drained from his face. The tray slipped from his grasp, crashing to the floor with a deafening shatter of porcelain. The hot tea spread across the rug like a dark stain. No, he breathed, the word a ragged, horrified whisper. He wasn't looking at her with triumph or satisfaction. He was staring at the marks on her skin with the same terror that was clawing its way up her own throat. By the moon. What have I done? He took a stumbling step back, his hand flying to his mouth as if to stifle a cry. The mask of control was gone, utterly shattered. In its place was the raw, unvarnished panic of a man who had just woken up with blood on his hands. I didn't, he stammered, his golden eyes wide with self-loathing. Arya, I would never. Not while I was awake. His horror was too genuine to be an act. This wasn't the work of a liar. It was the work of a monster who lived inside him, a beast that moved and acted while the man was asleep and helpless. The fake bond they had signed on paper was turning real, written on her very skin, and the man who was supposed to control it was just as terrified as she was. Chapter 5. The wolf in the dream sleep did not come easily that night. Arya lay in the cavernous bed, the silk sheets feeling less like a luxury and more like a silken trap. Every shadow in the corner of the room seemed to stretch and twist, taking on the shape of a wolf. Damon's horrified face was burned into her memory, a testament to the war he was fighting. He'd sworn he would lock his chamber, even chain himself to his bed if he had to prevent it from happening again. His desperation was palpable, but it offered her little comfort. A sleeping monster was still a monster. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, pulling her down into a darkness that felt different from ordinary sleep. It was thick, velvety, and scented with pine and damp earth. She found herself standing in a forest, but it wasn't a normal forest. Towering, silver-barked trees reached for a sky crowded with stars so bright they looked like spilled diamonds. The moon was a luminous white orb, bathing the clearing in an ethereal glow. Soft, glowing moss cushioned her bare feet. There was no fear here, only a profound, humming peace she had never known in her waking life. A twig snapped nearby. She turned, her heart giving a single, heavy thud. From between the ancient trees, a creature of breathtaking power emerged. It was a wolf, massive and black as a starless night, with fur tipped in silver that shimmered like moonlight. It was larger than any wolf she had ever seen, its presence radiating an ancient intelligence. And its eyes were the molten, swirling gold of the alpha. This was him. This was the beast. Arya should have screamed. She should have run. Her body was frozen, but not with terror. It was awe. The great wolf took a slow, deliberate step toward her, its movements a ripple of contained power. It didn't growl or snarl. It simply watched her, its golden gaze filled with an emotion she couldn't name. It was possessive, yes, but there was also a deep, aching tenderness there, a recognition that went deeper than sight. This was all because he was her mate, a bond she was just starting to feel. He stopped a few feet away and lowered his head, a gesture of submission. It made no sense. He was the predator, the monster. Yet here, in this strange, magical place, the dynamic was different. Hesitantly, she took a step forward, then another. Reaching out a trembling hand, she laid it on his broad head, her fingers sinking into the thick, soft fur. It felt like touching living midnight. A low rumble vibrated through his chest, a sound that wasn't a growl of aggression, but something closer to a purr. He leaned into her touch, his entire massive body surrendering to her gentle contact. He then nudged her hand with his nose, guiding it to her own neck to the place where the ghost of his bite remained. He let out a soft whine, a sound of apology and regret, before gently rubbing his cheek against the marks, as if trying to soothe the phantom ache. In this dream, the wolf wasn't a monster. He was a protector. He was a partner. He was a captive inside a man who feared him, and he was reaching out to her in the only way he could. A profound sense of connection bloomed in her chest, a warmth that chased away the last of her fear. She felt a strange pull, a sense of belonging to this magnificent creature. Who was the real Damon? The cold, controlled man? Or this powerful, emotive beast? The edges of the dream began to blur, the silver forest fading into gray. The wolf lifted his head, his golden eyes locking with hers one last time, full of a desperate, silent plea. "Don't leave me." Arya woke with a sharp gasp, her own name a half-formed whisper on her lips. No, not her name. His. Damon. The sound was soft, barely a breath in the silent, luxurious room. But as the echo of it faded, from somewhere far down the corridor, beyond her locked door, she heard the distinct, sharp sound of a floorboard creaking under a sudden, heavy weight. He had heard her. The connection was real, and it worked both ways. Chapter 6. Whispers of a Crimson Moon. 2 days passed in a haze of surreal tension. Arya and Damon avoided each other, two ghosts haunting opposite ends of a gilded cage. He sent servants with her meals. She stayed in her chambers, the phantom feeling of soft fur under her fingertips a constant, confusing memory. The dream of the wolf had changed something inside her. Her fear of the alpha was now complicated by a strange, burgeoning empathy for the beast he kept locked away. She was tied to them both, man and wolf, in a way she was only just beginning to understand. Then came the summons. It was her first official duty as the contract Luna, a formal dinner with the Pack's elders, and a visiting emissary from the Moon Council. Dressed in a gown of deep sapphire silk that felt like a costume, Arya stood beside Damon at the entrance to the formal dining hall. He looked magnificent and terrible, his black alpha's attire making him seem carved from shadow and authority. He hadn't spoken a word to her all evening, but as the first guests arrived, he leaned in close, his breath warm against her ear. "Just stay by my side. Nod and smile. Do not speak unless spoken to. We must look united." His hand rested on the small of her back, the touch light but proprietary. It was a calculated gesture for the audience, but it sent a shiver down her spine all the same. She could feel the rigid control in him, the immense effort it took for him to maintain this calm facade. She gave a small, stiff nod. The performance began. For the next hour, she played her part. She smiled until her cheeks ached. She accepted polite greetings from wolves who, just days ago, would have looked right through her. Their eyes were full of curiosity and suspicion, but Damon's presence beside her was an impenetrable shield. A strange thing happened as they stood there, a united front against the prying eyes of the court. A sense of partnership, however fragile and fake, began to form. He would subtly guide her with the pressure of his hand. She would subtly diffuse a nosy elder's question with a demure smile. They were a team. The arrival of the council emissary changed the room's atmosphere instantly. He was an old wolf, his face a mask of wrinkles, and his eyes holding the cold, dead light of ancient law. He bowed stiffly to Damon. "Alpha Kale, the council sends its greetings, and its decree." A hush fell over the room. The emissary unrolled a heavy scroll, his voice ringing out with grim finality. "By the celestial alignment and the turning of the ages, the Moon Council hereby declares the coming of the Blood Moon. It will rise in 1 month's time." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Arya felt Damon go utterly rigid beside her. The hand on her back tightened, his fingers digging into her flesh like claws. The Blood Moon. The night his curse had first manifested. The anniversary of his first mate's death. The name itself felt like a curse, a promise of carnage and sorrow. Why was this happening now? The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. All packs are ordered to perform the rites of appeasement, the emissary droned on, oblivious to the storm he had unleashed. All cursed bloodlines are to be monitored for the safety of all. Damon made a choked sound, a pained gasp that was ripped from his chest. Arya risked a glance at him. His face was a mask of agony, his skin unnaturally pale. His knuckles were white where he gripped the hilt of a ceremonial dagger at his belt. "Alpha?" she whispered, her feigned role forgotten in a wave of genuine concern. He didn't seem to hear her. His eyes were screwed shut in pain. He tore at the high collar of his tunic, gasping for air. As he ripped the fabric, Arya saw it. On the pale skin of his chest, just over his heart, a faint crimson light began to glow. It swirled and coalesced, forming an intricate, thorny sigil that burned itself onto his skin like a brand from an invisible iron. It was a mark of dark magic, a symbol of the curse that owned him. The countdown had begun. The curse was reawakening, and she was standing at the epicenter of the coming storm. Chapter 7. A Kiss for the Pack. The weeks leading up to the summit were a blur of lessons. Arya learned the lineages of the 7 great packs, the intricate laws of the Moon Council, and the proper way to address an elder versus a rival alpha. She was a quick study, her mind sharp from a lifetime of observation from the shadows. Damon was a distant but demanding teacher. He never praised her, but she would sometimes catch him watching her during her lessons, a flicker of something unreadable in his golden eyes before his mask of indifference slammed back into place. A fragile, unspoken truce had settled between them. They were partners in this grand deception, and a strange sort of comfort grew in that shared secret. Tonight, however, there was no comfort. They were at a neutral ground summit, a gathering of alphas hosted by the Silver Creek Pack. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and suspicion, 100 powerful predators crammed into one room, all smiling with teeth bared. Arya stood beside Damon, her spine straight, her expression a careful, pleasant blank. The sapphire gown felt like armor. "Alpha Kale," a smooth voice drawled. Alpha Marcus of the Red Fang Pack approached them, a smirk playing on his handsome face. He was known for his cruelty and his cunning. "And you must be the sudden Luna, a surprise to us all. One wonders what prompted such a hasty union." His eyes roamed over Arya, insolent and possessive, as if she were a prize he was evaluating. Arya felt a flash of hot anger. Before she could stop herself, a sharp retort was on her lips. "Some things, Alpha Marcus, are simply fated. They do not require the approval of a committee." Marcus's smirk widened, but his eyes hardened. "Fated or convenient? Your alpha has been without a mate for a long time. It makes a wolf desperate." The insult was aimed at Damon, a clear challenge to his stability and his power. The air grew thick and heavy. Other alphas were watching now, waiting to see how the famously controlled Damon Kale would react. Arya saw the muscles in his jaw bunch. She felt the temperature around them drop, the coiled power in him straining at its leash. He was going to lose his temper, and it would be a disaster. Then he did something she never could have predicted. He turned to her, his movements deceptively calm. His golden eyes met hers, and in their depths, she saw a silent, desperate command. "Trust me. Play along." Before she could react, his hand cupped the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. He drew her in, his gaze dropping to her lips. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. "My Luna," he said, his voice a low, possessive rumble meant for everyone to hear, "is not a matter of convenience. She is a matter of destiny." And then he kissed her. It was meant to be a show, an act of political theater to silence a rival and project an image of unshakable unity. The first touch of his lips was firm, a clear statement of ownership. But then, something shifted. The simmering connection that had sparked between them, in the dream, over the broken teacup, in their shared secret, ignited. The cold, calculated pressure of his mouth softened, warmed. A low groan vibrated from his chest, a sound of pure, unfeigned need. Her mind went blank. The world dissolved into a single point of contact. The scent of him, pine, ozone, and wild earth, filled her senses. This was not a performance. This was the desperate loneliness of a cursed man and the hungry soul of his wolf, reaching out for the first time. She felt herself responding, her body leaning into his, her lips parting in a silent gasp. Just as quickly as it began, it was over. He pulled back, his breath coming in ragged bursts. His eyes were wide, the gold swirling with shock and a terrifying, raw desire. He looked as stunned as she felt. He had meant to start a fire for the crowd, but instead, he had lit a fuse connected to a powder keg. They stared at each other for a heart-stopping second, the roar of the summit fading into a distant buzz. Marcus was speechless, his smirk wiped clean from his face. The message had been sent. But a new, far more dangerous one had been exchanged between Arya and Damon. The line between the contract and reality had just been burned away, and they were both standing in the ashes, terrified of what would rise from them. Chapter 8. The Beast at the Border. The kiss changed everything. The careful distance they had maintained was now filled with a humming, vibrant tension. A simple glance across the breakfast table felt charged with unspoken meaning. A chance brush of hands in a corridor was enough to make them both flinch as if burned. The memory of his lips on hers was a constant, distracting heat. He had broken his own rule, and in doing so, he had shattered the fragile peace of their arrangement. Damon retreated even further into himself, his silence heavier, his control more brittle than ever. Their newfound tension was put to the test less than a week later. A scout, breathless and bleeding, burst into the great hall with a report. Red Fang wolves, led by Alpha Marcus himself, had crossed their northern border. They weren't attacking. They were hunting on Black Moon land, a deliberate and profound insult, an act of aggression that could not be ignored. Within the hour, Damon was on the move, a war party of his best enforcers at his back. To Arya's shock, he commanded her to come. "They must see you," he'd said, his voice clipped and harsh. "They must see us. This is the price of the game we are playing." They met Marcus and his wolves in a clearing smelling of pine and damp soil. The air was cold, the mood colder. Marcus was leaning against a tree, arrogant as ever, a half-eaten apple in his hand. He tossed the core aside as Damon's party approached. "Kale," Marcus greeted him with a lazy smile, "just enjoying the bounty of the land. Your territory is so much richer than mine." "This is your only warning, Marcus." Damon's voice was dangerously low, a growl rumbling beneath the surface. "Take your mongrels and get off my land before I decorate these trees with your hides." Marcus's eyes slid past Damon to settle on Arya. His gaze was a physical violation. "Or what? You'll have your little pet Luna sing me a song? Tell me, Kale, is she even one of us? Her scent is thin, weak, like a stray you picked up for show." He took a deliberate step toward her. "I wonder if she bleeds the same as a real she-wolf." That was the spark. Something inside Damon broke. A guttural snarl, utterly inhuman, ripped from his throat. It was not the controlled threat of an alpha. It was the unrestrained rage of a beast. His body contorted, his shoulders hunching. The bones in his hands began to crack and elongate, his fingernails thickening into black, vicious claws. His eyes, they bled from gold into burning, hellish pits of pure instinct. He was losing control. He was going to shift right here, right now, and tear Marcus to pieces, an act that would plunge both packs into a bloody, devastating war. Everyone froze. Marcus's smug look vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine fear. Damon's own warriors took a step back, terrified of their alpha's unrestrained power. But Arya moved forward. She didn't know why. An instinct, deep and primal, screamed at her to go to him. While everyone else saw a monster about to break its chains, she saw the agony of the wolf in her dream, the tormented man behind the mask. She walked right into the heart of the storm, stopping directly in front of him. "Damon," she said, her voice a soft command. He didn't seem to hear her. He was too far gone, lost in the crimson tide of his rage. So she did the one thing her mind was screaming not to do. She reached out and laid her hand flat against his arm. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. His convulsing body went rigid. A shudder racked his entire frame, a tremor of immense power being forced back into submission. The killing rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by a dazed confusion. He looked down at her hand on his arm as if it were a foreign object, then up at her face. The gold in his eyes softened, the black claws retracting with a sickening crackle of bone. The man was coming back. He stumbled back a step, breathing heavily. The transformation halted mid-shift. He stared at her, his expression a chaotic mix of awe, gratitude, and stark terror. Her touch had pulled him back from the abyss. No one had ever been able to do that before. She was his anchor. His only one. That night, as she lay in her bed, she heard a sound from his adjoining chambers. A broken, mumbled whisper, slurred with the exhaustion of a tortured sleep. "Don't run. I'll die if you run." Chapter 9. The Heartbeat Ritual. News of the border confrontation spread like wildfire. The version whispered in the halls was a twisted one, that Alpha Kale's new Luna was a common stray who had driven him to the brink of a war-starting rampage. The story reached the Moon Council, feeding their already deep-seated suspicions. Alpha Marcus, humiliated but clever, likely fueled the rumors himself. The result was inevitable. The cold-eyed emissary returned, not with a decree, but with a summons. They met in the sterile, intimidating council chamber within Black Moon's own territory. The elders were present, their faces grim and judgmental. The air was thick with the scent of old stone and older laws. "There are concerns," the emissary said, his voice devoid of warmth. "Your union was sudden. Your Luna is of no known lineage. Her presence at the border incident is troubling. The council requires definitive proof that this is a true, fated mating, and not a political sham designed to conceal your instability, Alpha Kale." Damon stood rigid, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "My bond with my Luna is my own affair." "It becomes the council's affair when your actions threaten to destabilize the region," the emissary countered smoothly. "Therefore, we invoke the right of unison, an ancient and infallible test. If the bond is true, the goddess will bear witness. If it is false, you will be exposed." Arya's blood ran cold. She had read about the rite. The Luna was to place her hand over the Alpha's heart in front of witnesses. If the bond was blessed by the moon goddess, their two heartbeats would magically, impossibly sink into one. It was a test of faith, a test of fate, a test they were doomed to fail. This was it. Their deception was over. "We refuse," Damon said, his voice flat and final. "To refuse is to admit your guilt," the emissary stated. "You will be stripped of your alpha status. Your pack will be placed under council regency." It was a checkmate. Ruin was at their door. Damon looked at Arya, his eyes a swirling vortex of despair and defeat. He was ready to fall on his sword to protect her from this. But as she looked back at him, she didn't feel despair. She remembered the wolf in her dream, reaching out to her. She remembered the desperation in his kiss, and she remembered the feeling of his rage dissolving under her touch at the border. There was something between them. It wasn't a contract. It was real. "We accept," Arya said, her voice ringing with a confidence she didn't feel. Damon stared at her, shocked into silence. The elders murmured. The emissary simply nodded. "Then let it be done." They were moved to the center of the chamber, a circle of grim-faced wolves closing in around them. The silence was deafening. Damon's face was pale, his expression resigned to their fate. He clearly believed this was the end. He unlaced the front of his tunic, baring the skin over his heart where the thorny sigil of his curse pulsed with a faint, malevolent light. With a trembling hand, Arya reached out. Her fingers were icy cold as she pressed her palm against the warmth of his chest. Beneath her hand, she could feel the frantic, terrified thrumming of his heart. It was a wild, panicked rhythm, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline. Her own heart was hammering against her ribs, just as fast, just as scared, but completely out of sync with his. Nothing was happening. A few of the elders began to exchange knowing, smug glances. This wasn't working. It was failing. Panic seized her. Then a thought. This wasn't about a physical connection. It was something deeper. Closing her eyes, she shut out the watching faces, the cold room, the fear. She thought of the gentle, pleading eyes of the wolf in her dream. She focused on the memory of his raw, aching loneliness she'd tasted in his kiss. She reached out, not with her hand, but with her spirit, pushing past the curse's thorny sigil, searching for the man and the beast hidden beneath. I'm here, she thought, pouring all her will into the silent message. I won't run. A jolt, like the lightning strike when they first touched, shot through her hand. Beneath her palm, Damon's frantic heartbeat stuttered. It skipped once, twice, and then it fell into a new rhythm. A slower, stronger, steadier beat. She felt her own pulse leap and then, impossibly, miraculously, it slowed to match his. Thump, 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 thump. It wasn't his heartbeat or her heartbeat. It was ours. She opened her eyes and looked up at him. Damon was staring down at her, his face a mask of utter, dumbfounded awe. His lips were parted in a silent gasp. He could feel it, too. He could feel her pulse inside his own chest. The bond wasn't fake. It never had been. And now, everyone knew it. Chapter 10. A Memory in a Kiss. The aftermath of the ritual was a deafening silence. The elders and the council emissary had departed, their faces a mixture of shock and grudging acceptance, leaving a trail of unspoken questions in their wake. Arya and Damon were left alone in the vast, cold council chamber, the energy of their unified heartbeat still humming in the air between them like a plucked string. The lie had become truth. The performance had become real. And now, neither of them knew the steps to this new, terrifying dance. He wouldn't look at her. He strode to the far side of the room, staring into the cold hearth, as if the answers were written in the soot. His entire body was a fortress of tension, his shoulders rigid, his hands clenched. This changes nothing, he said, his voice rough. The contract stands, this unison. It was a magical fluke, a trick of the curse. Arya's fragile hope withered. After everything, he was still pushing her away, still hiding behind his walls. A fluke? She shot back, her voice rising with a strength she didn't know she possessed. I felt your heart, Damon. You felt mine. Stop hiding. What are you so afraid of? You know nothing of what I fear, he snarled, whipping around to face her. His golden eyes were blazing, a chaotic storm of rage and something else, something that looked like sheer, gut-wrenching terror. You think this is a gift? This bond? It is a death sentence. It is a weapon aimed at your throat, and my hand is on the trigger. He stalked toward her, closing the distance between them until she was backed against a cold stone wall. The sheer force of his presence was overwhelming, a physical wave of power and pain. He was losing the battle for control, and she was the cause. You want to know what I'm afraid of? He whispered, his voice cracking. He braced his hands on the wall on either side of her head, caging her in. I'm afraid of this. Then his mouth was on hers. It was nothing like their first kiss. There was no performance, no gentleness. This was a desperate, angry collision, a raw outpouring of all the fear and longing he kept chained inside. It was the kiss of a drowning man, and she was his last breath of air. The taste of him was ozone and despair. But as the raw emotion of the kiss overwhelmed her, the bond between them flared to life. It became a conduit, a bridge directly into his soul. The world fractured. She was no longer in the cold chamber. She was standing in a field of sun-drenched wildflowers. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. A woman with hair the color of fire was laughing, weaving daisies into a chain. Her name was Livia. The feeling that washed through Arya was not her own. It was Damon's. An overwhelming, pure love that was so vast it felt like the sky itself. Then the sky began to bleed. The blue bled to orange, then to a sickening, bruised purple, and finally to the color of blood. The blood moon. A wave of agony, not his but from the curse, slammed into him. His vision blurred. He was on the ground, fighting, screaming. His hands, they weren't hands anymore. They were covered in black fur, tipped with claws. Livia was screaming his name, her face a mask of terror, but she wasn't running from him. She was running to him, trying to reach the man inside the beast. He felt the wolf's snarl rip through his throat. He felt the uncontrollable lunge. He saw her terrified, loving eyes for one last second. Then a spray of red against the wildflowers. The vision shattered. Arya tore her mouth from his, stumbling backward with a choked cry. Her hand flew to her own lips, but the taste in her mouth was of his grief. The horror she felt wasn't for her own safety. It was for him, for the impossible weight he had been carrying, alone, for all these years. He stared at her, his chest heaving, expecting her to scream, to run. Instead, she looked into his tortured, golden eyes and saw the truth. "You're not cursed," she whispered, her voice breaking with an empathy that was as shocking as the vision itself. "You're grieving." Chapter 11. The Blood of the Moon. The weight of his memory was a physical thing, a shroud that settled over Arya long after she had fled the council chamber. She finally understood. Damon's cruelty, his obsessive control, his fear of their bond, it was all a frantic attempt to keep the world safe from himself. He wasn't a monster who enjoyed his power. He was a good man haunted by a beast he could not command. He was a walking wound, just as the nobles had whispered. But they had no idea how deep it went. Sleep offered no escape, but a different kind of journey. She felt the familiar pull, the velvety darkness that smelled of pine and damp earth. She was seeking him. Not the man, but the wolf. She needed answers that Damon was incapable of giving. The dream forest was different this time. The air was charged, expectant. The silver moonlight seemed brighter, pulsing with a quiet rhythm. She found him waiting by a still, black pool that reflected the star-dusted sky perfectly. The great black wolf, Cain, watched her approach, his golden eyes filled with an ancient sorrow. There was no tenderness this time, only a grave urgency. As she drew near, he turned and nudged a ripple across the surface of the pool with his nose. The reflection of the stars dissolved, replaced by an image. It was a woman, ancient and powerful, with hair like spun moonlight and veins that glowed with a soft silver light. She stood before a sickly red-tinged moon, her hands raised. From her palms, a gentle white light flowed, pushing back against the crimson tide, cleansing it. Then the image changed. It showed a drop of silver liquid falling into a drop of red blood. Instead of mixing, the silver consumed the red, turning the entire droplet into a pure, shimmering pearl. Cain looked at her, pushing a wave of feeling and knowledge directly into her mind. It was not a voice, but a pure, conceptual understanding that bloomed in her thoughts. He showed her the image of the silver-veined woman again, and then he pushed the feeling of her own skin, her own blood, into her consciousness. They were the same. Moon blood. The word was a silent thunderclap in her soul. It was a name for what she was, a name for a power she never knew she had, a lineage thought to be lost for centuries. The wolf explained, through a torrent of feelings and images, that moon blood was the moon's antithesis to the curse. It was a balancing agent, a healing power. Her touch had calmed Damon at the border, not because of a simple mate bond, but because her very essence was a balm to the fire of his curse. This was why her mother was rejected, why her power was feared. They must have sensed it in her bloodline. A dizzying sense of purpose washed over Arya. Her whole life she had thought her blood was a source of shame, a dilution of the pack's strength. Now she knew it held the key to his salvation. But then the wolf's mood shifted. The feeling he sent her now was one of immense danger, of a razor's edge. He changed the image in the pool. It now showed the drop of silver liquid falling into the red blood. But this time, the silver flickered and died. The red consumed it, turning the entire droplet into a boiling, corrupt black. The message was terrifyingly clear. Her moonblood was the potential cure, but it was also a catalyst. If her will, her heart, or her connection to him was not strong enough when the blood moon rose, her power would not soothe the curse. It would magnify it, feed it, and transform his beast into something utterly unstoppable, a creature that would consume them both. She was his only hope, and his most certain damnation. The dream shattered abruptly. Arya gasped, her eyes flying open to the cold reality of her chamber. Her heart was pounding with the weight of her new knowledge. She was the key. She had to be strong enough. Drawn by an unseen force, she rose and went to the window. She pushed aside the heavy velvet curtain and looked out into the night sky. High above the dark, jagged peaks of the mountains, the moon hung. It was no longer a perfect, pearlescent white. A distinct and undeniable crimson tinge bled across its edge, staining the night with a promise of coming horror. It was closer. So much closer than anyone had realized. Chapter 12. The Cruelest Mercy. The revelation of the moonblood changed the ground beneath Arya's feet. For the first time in her life, she felt a sense of purpose that was deeper than mere survival. The fear was still there, a cold stone in her gut, but it was now overshadowed by a fierce, protective determination. She had to save him. She had to be strong enough. She spent the next day seeking Damon out, needing to tell him, to share the impossible burden. But he was nowhere to be found. He was avoiding her, leaving her alone with the terrifying secret that held both their fates. She finally found him that evening. He was standing in the cavernous entryway of the main keep, dressed for travel, his back to her. A cold draft swirled in from the open doors, carrying the scent of pine and coming snow. "Damon," she said, her voice soft. He turned, and the man who faced her was a stranger. The tortured, grieving man from the council chamber was gone. The wolf from her dreams was buried. In their place was the cold, untouchable Alpha from the first night she met him, but his mask was 100 times more cruel, his eyes as flat and dead as winter ice. "The arrangement is over," he said, his voice clipping the words with brutal precision. "You are to be escorted to the edge of our territory. From there, you are on your own." Arya's heart stopped. "What? No. After the ritual, after what happened—" "The ritual was a farce," he cut her off, his tone laced with a dismissive scorn that felt like a slap. "A magical anomaly, a meaningless surge of power caused by the curse. It meant nothing." The words were so cold, so different from the man whose grief she had tasted, that she couldn't process them. "You're lying," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "I saw your memory. I know what happened to Livia. You can't hide from me anymore." Mentioning his first mate's name was a mistake. A flicker of unbearable pain crossed his face before it was replaced by a look of pure venom. He took a step toward her, his expression twisting into a cruel sneer. "You saw what the curse wanted you to see. You think you're special? You are a stray, a half-blood servant girl I used to placate the council. Your mother was a weak fool who thought she could rise above her station, and you are just like her." Every word was a perfectly crafted dagger, aimed at the deepest, most vulnerable parts of her soul. He was using her history, her deepest insecurities, against her. He was confirming her lifelong fear, that she was worthless and that any hope of love or belonging was a foolish dream. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and sharp. This was the ultimate rejection, a denial of the truth she had felt in his heart and in his wolf's soul. "I don't believe you," she choked out, though her heart was shattering. "Believe it," he said, his voice dropping to a merciless whisper. "You were a means to an end, a tool, and I am done with you. Now get out of my sight. He turned his back on her, a final, absolute dismissal. That was what broke her, the sight of his rigid, unrelenting back. It was over. He was right. Her mother had been a fool, and she had been an even bigger one to believe in a connection with a monster. The pain was so immense it transformed into a white-hot rage. Rage at him, at the world, at herself for being so stupid. Fine. She would go. She would do exactly what he wanted. Whirling around, she ran. She didn't look back. She pushed past the stunned guards at the door and fled into the biting wind of the courtyard, her tears freezing on her cheeks. She ran blindly, stumbling toward the dark, tangled sanctuary of the forest, the only home she had ever known. She didn't want his protection. She didn't want his pack. She just wanted to disappear. Back in the entryway, Damon stood frozen until the sound of her frantic footsteps faded into the howl of the wind. The moment she was gone, the iron mask of his control shattered into a million pieces. His legs gave out, and he collapsed against the cold stone wall, his body racked with a silent, agonizing sob. The sacrifice was made. She was safe from him. She was safe from the council. But the cost was unbearable. A sound ripped from his throat, a sound of pure, animalistic agony that was not his own. It was a howl of utter desolation, the voice of the wolf, howling for its lost half. "You fool!" the beast raged inside his head. "You broke her! You broke us!" Chapter 13. An Offering of Ash. The howl that ripped through Damon's soul was not his own. It was the pure, undiluted agony of his wolf, Cain, a beast mourning the loss of a limb. Arya was gone. He had done it. He had taken the fragile, budding trust between them and deliberately shattered it against the stone walls of his duty. The victory felt exactly like death. The keep, which had started to feel less like a prison with her presence, was once again a vast, echoing tomb. Every shadow seemed to hold her scent, wild herbs and a defiant strength that was now lost to him forever. He pushed himself off the wall, his movements stiff, his body an aching, hollow shell. The bond, now stretched taut and frayed across miles of dark forest, was a line of constant, searing pain in his chest. It was a phantom limb that would ache for the rest of his very short life. Cain was a silent, furious weight in his mind now, the earlier rage having collapsed into a profound, accusing grief. "You let her go. You pushed her away." "I set her free," Damon corrected the voice in his head, the thought brittle. "This is the only mercy I have ever been able to show." With a resolve born from utter despair, he turned and walked back toward the council chamber. There was one final piece of his plan to enact. His face was a mask of cold granite, his eyes holding the flat, dead light of a man who had already accepted his end. He had sacrificed his heart. Offering up the rest of him was a simple, logical next step. He entered the chamber without ceremony. The emissary and the elders were still there, their expressions a mixture of triumph and wary respect. They had seen him break the girl just as they'd wanted. "She is gone," Damon announced, his voice a dead monotone that betrayed no emotion. "The stray has been cast out. The bond, as you suspected, was a magical anomaly, a falsehood." The emissary nodded slowly, his ancient eyes searching Damon's for any sign of deception. He found none. There was nothing left to find. "And the matter of your condition?" "It is as you fear," Damon said, the admission costing him nothing now. "The curse is unstable. With the blood moon approaching, I am a threat to my pack and to the entire region." He walked to the center of the room, stopping directly in front of the emissary's chair. He met the old wolf's gaze without flinching. "I have a proposal." He let the words hang in the silent room, a room that still held the ghost of her defiance and the echo of their shared heartbeat. He was giving them the ultimate prize, the solution they had sought for years. "I will not fight the curse," Damon stated, his voice ringing with chilling finality. "I will surrender to it. Take me to the blood moon altar. Chain me to the stone. Let it have me." He saw the shock, the avarice, the dawning understanding on their faces. I will offer myself as a sacrifice to appease the moon. In exchange, you will officially decree that the bond between myself and the girl, Arya Vale, was null. You will erase her from our records. You will declare her a free wolf, to be left alone by all packs under council authority for all time. My life, for her absolute freedom. It was a masterstroke. He was giving them everything they wanted, the removal of the cursed alpha, while achieving the one thing he now desired above all else: Arya's permanent, guaranteed safety. He was using their own laws to protect her in a way he never could while she was at his side. The emissary stood, a slow, cruel smile spreading across his wrinkled face. The council accepts your generous offer, Alpha Kale. They did not wait. The guards led him from the chamber, not as a prisoner in chains, but as a man walking willingly to his own execution. They took him down into the cold, damp dungeons that lay deep in the rock beneath the keep, in a cell whose single, high window looked out upon the path to the sacred altar. As the heavy iron door slammed shut, plunging him into shadow, Damon felt a strange sense of peace. He had lost everything. He had broken the heart of the only person who had ever seen the man behind the monster. But he had saved her. That had to be enough. Chapter 14. The Howl and the Echo. The forest was a merciless sanctuary. It offered Arya the brutal solitude she craved, its thorny branches snagging at her clothes like clutching hands, its frozen ground punishing her every frantic step. For 2 days, she ran on nothing but rage and grief, a wild creature propelled by the agony of betrayal. Damon's words were a venom that had seeped into her soul, confirming every dark fear she'd ever had about herself. Stray. Tool. Just like your mother. The pain was a physical thing, a hollow ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She foraged for berries and roots, her survival instincts honed by a childhood of neglect. She found shelter in the hollow of a lightning-scarred oak, curling into a tight ball against the gnawing cold. She tried to sever the connection to him, to build a wall of anger so high and thick that no thought of him could penetrate it. She focused on her anger, because anger was a fire that kept the soul-deep cold of his rejection at bay. He had used her. He had lied to her. She hated him. But the bond, frayed and stretched as it was, refused to break. It was a faint, insistent hum beneath the surface of her fury, a low thrum of sorrow that was not her own. On the third night, as she huddled in her makeshift den, a wave of such profound despair washed over her that it brought her to her knees. It was a feeling of ultimate sacrifice, of a lonely, final peace that comes only at the end of everything. It was his emotion, bleeding across the distance, an echo of a choice he had made. And then she felt the howl. It wasn't a sound that traveled through the air. It was a psychic scream that erupted directly in her soul, a silent, shattering cry of a wolf mourning its own death. It was Cain. He was calling to her, his voice no longer a dream, but a desperate, insistent whisper in the back of her mind. He wasn't sending words, but flashes of feeling, fragments of intent, sacrifice, altar, for you. Alone, dying. The pieces slammed into place in her mind, forming a picture that made her blood run cold. Damon's cruelty, the timing of it, the way he had pushed her away, ensuring she would run as far and as fast as she could. It wasn't an act of hate, it was an act of protection, a brutal, clumsy, heart-shattering act of love. He had pushed her away not to save himself, but to save her, and now he was facing the council, the curse, and the blood moon, alone. He was going to die for her. The rage that had sustained her collapsed, instantly transmuted into a different kind of fire. A furious, protective love so fierce it stole her breath. He would not do this. She would not let him. Her life of running was over. Her selfish desire for personal freedom was a childish dream compared to this. What was freedom in a world without him? Scrambling out of the hollow log, she looked up through the canopy. The moon, once a sliver of hope, was now nearly full, swollen and fat with a sickly crimson light. Time was running out. Her path was no longer one of escape. It was a path of return, a war path. She was not the weak, half-blood stray he had called her. She was the daughter of a Luna. She was the mate of an Alpha, and she was the carrier of the moon blood. He thought he was her doom, but she was his only hope. With a cry that was half sob, half war cry, she began to run, not away from him, but back toward the heart of the pack, toward the sacred altar, toward the man who was willing to die for her. As her feet pounded against the frozen earth, a sudden, searing heat erupted on her neck. The ghost of a bite, the mark he had given her in his sleep, began to glow, not with a faint violet, but with a brilliant, pulsing silver light. It was an answer, a beacon, a promise. Chapter 15. A Beast of Shadow and Starlight. Arya ran faster than she ever had in her life, her lungs burning, her body fueled by a desperate, incandescent purpose. She followed the silver pulse of the bond, a magical compass pointing her toward Damon's fading life force. She burst through the final line of trees onto the sacred grounds, a wind-swept hill crowned with a ring of monolithic standing stones that seemed to drink the moonlight. The scene before her was a nightmare. The blood moon was at its zenith, a baleful crimson eye glaring down from the sky, bathing the entire hilltop in an apocalyptic red glow. The elders and the council emissary stood in a silent, grim circle. And in the center, chained with thick silver-sheened shackles to a massive, flat-topped altar stone, was Damon. He was shirtless, his body already slick with a sweat of agony, the thorny sigil on his chest glowing like a hot coal. Her arrival was a stone thrown into a still, dark pool. A collective gasp went through the assembled wolves. The emissary's face twisted in fury. "You!" he hissed. "You should be gone!" Damon's head snapped up. His golden eyes, wide with torment, found hers across the clearing. The look on his face was not of relief, but of utter, soul-crushing despair. His sacrifice, his final, perfect act of love, had been for nothing. "Arya." "No," he choked out. "Run." But she stood her ground, planting her feet. "I'm done running." At that moment, the red light of the moon intensified, a wave of pure, malevolent power washing over the hilltop. Damon screamed. It was a sound that tore itself from the very fabric of his soul, a shriek of a being ripped in two. His back arched, the chains groaning against his struggles. The sigil on his chest erupted, not just glowing but exploding outward. A violent, tearing sound filled the air. His physical body went limp, collapsing against the stone altar like a discarded puppet. But from the center of his chest, two forms ripped themselves free. The first was a creature of pure nightmare. A monstrous wolf made of roiling shadow and crimson energy twice the size of any living wolf. Its fur was the darkness between stars, its claws were shards of obsidian, and its eyes burned with the same blood-red light as the moon above. This was the curse, given form. A being of pure, mindless rage. It let out a deafening roar that shook the standing stones, but a second form emerged with it. It was a being of equal and opposite power. A great wolf made not of shadow, but of starlight and moonbeams, its fur a shimmering, ethereal silver. It moved with a grace that was otherworldly. Its eyes were the pure, intelligent, sorrowful gold she knew from her dreams. It was Cain. His spirit, his essence finally torn free from both the man and the curse. The clearing held its breath. Damon lay broken and human between his two halves. The shadow beast, the curse incarnate, lowered its head, snarling as it gathered itself to rampage and destroy everything in sight. The elders took an involuntary step back, their faces pale with terror. They had unleashed something far beyond their control. Cain, the spirit wolf, paid the shadow beast no mind. He ignored the cowering elders. He gave the broken form of his human self only a passing, sorrowful glance. Instead, he turned his magnificent, starlit head and looked directly at Arya. With a quiet, deliberate grace that defied the chaos around him, he padded across the blood-soaked grass, his paws making no sound. He stopped directly in front of her, his presence a calming balm against the tide of dark energy. Then, in an act that shattered every law and tradition of the werewolf world, the proud, powerful spirit of the Black Moon Alpha lowered his head, bent his front legs, and knelt before her. Chapter 16. A Tide of Crimson and Shadow. The world snapped into a terrifying, silent clarity. Cain, the magnificent spirit wolf, was kneeling to her. The act was so profoundly unnatural, so contrary to the laws of their world, that it shattered the resolve of the elders. The council emissary's face, a mask of wrinkles and ancient authority, contorted with pure, unadulterated panic. This was not a stray. This was not a political sham. This was something new, something powerful, and something he could not control. "Abomination!" he shrieked, his voice thin and sharp as splintered bone. "She has enthralled the Alpha's spirit. This is dark magic. Destroy them all. The man, the beast, the witch." His command broke the spell of awe and terror. The elders, their fear now channeled into righteous fury, drew their weapons, curved silver daggers that drank the bloody moonlight and gleamed with cold purpose. With a unified roar, they charged. Chaos erupted. The world became a whirlwind of motion and sound. The great shadow beast, the curse given form, reacted to the aggression with an explosion of mindless violence. It was a tide of crimson and shadow, a living engine of destruction. It met the first wave of elders with a roar that tore through the air, its spectral claws ripping through flesh and leather as if they were cobwebs. It fought with no strategy, only an insatiable hunger for ruin. Simultaneously, Cain rose from his kneeling position. He moved not with the brute force of the shadow beast, but with a celestial, deadly grace. He became a blur of starlight and silver fur, intercepting warriors who broke from the main fray to charge toward Arya and the still unconscious Daemon. He was a guardian, his every movement precise, his jaws closing on limbs not to kill, but to disable. He was fighting a desperate battle to protect the two halves of his whole. Arya stood frozen between the two warring fronts, a helpless bystander to a battle for her soul. She watched an elder, a wolf she recognized from Daemon's lessons, fall with a scream, his throat torn out by the shadow beast. She saw Cain take a glancing blow from a silver dagger, his starlit form flickering and momentarily dimming with a pained yelp that echoed in her spirit. A horrifying realization dawned on her, cold and sharp. This wasn't working. Her love for Daemon, Cain's loyalty to her, these things were beautiful. They were true. But they were not enough to stop this. Cain was a spirit, and silver could harm him. The shadow beast was too powerful, too mindless. It would kill the elders, and then, with nothing left to provoke it, what would stop it from turning on Daemon's vulnerable human form? They were trapped in a cycle of destruction. She had to do something, not as a Luna, not as a mate, but as the only one here with the power to intervene. She had to stop trying to heal the man and start fighting the curse itself. Her eyes fell upon the altar stone where Daemon lay. The thorny, crimson sigil that had burned on his chest was now imprinted on the rock itself, a faint, glowing scar left behind when the curse had torn itself free. It was the source code of his agony, the anchor point. Without a second thought, driven by an instinct more profound than reason, she ran to the altar. She ignored the screams, the snarls, the chaos of the battle raging around her. She knelt beside Daemon's still form, reached out a trembling hand, and pressed her palm flat against the glowing sigil on the stone. The moment her skin made contact, her moon blood roared to life. It was a living silver fire in her veins that recognized its ancient enemy. A searing, unbearable pain shot up her arm as the sigil, the dark magic of the curse, detached from the stone. It flowed toward her like ink in water, a torrent of thorny, crimson lines that wrapped around her arm, branding themselves into her flesh from her palm to her shoulder. She screamed, the pain blinding, but she did not pull away. She was taking the curse's brand, making herself the new focal point. The battle had just become hers. Chapter 17. The Heart of the Stone. The pain was a living fire, a nest of burning thorns wrapped around her arm. The curse's sigil was a part of her now, a glowing red brand that pulsed in time with the malevolent moon above. Through the haze of agony, Arya saw the battle falter. The great shadow beast, which had been a whirlwind of destruction, slowed its rampage. It turned its head, its burning, soulless red eyes fixing on her. It felt the shift. It recognized the new anchor for its power. It recognized her. A terrible, unnatural silence fell over the hilltop, broken only by the groans of the wounded. Cain, the spirit wolf, took advantage of the lull, placing himself squarely between Arya and the shadow beast, his starlit form a shimmering protective shield. He let out a low, warning growl. Arya knelt beside the altar, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She knew this was only a temporary pause. She had the curse's attention, but she couldn't contain it. Not like this. She was just a vessel, and a fragile one at that. She remembered a fragment from one of the ancient texts she had studied, a whispered legend the pack historian had dismissed as folklore. The curse is not in the bloodline alone, but in the land. The heart of the Alpha is bound to the heart of the stone, the bloodstone, an ancient anchor, a focal point that tied the curse to the Kale lineage and to this sacred blood-soaked ground. As long as the stone remained, the curse would always have a home to return to. She had to pull it out. She had to unmoor it. With the sigil on her arm as her key, a conduit into the stone's dark magic, she looked at Damon's unconscious face. His features were relaxed for the first time she had ever seen them, free from the torment that had defined his life. This was for him, for the man, and for the wolf who had knelt to her. This was her choice, her sacrifice. "I love you," she whispered, a confession to the sleeping man. Then she turned and plunged her branded arm into the solid rock of the altar. It was not like pushing through stone. It was like pushing through a millennium of solidified pain, of rage, of sorrow. The rock resisted, its magical essence scraping against her bones, trying to repel the alien purity of her moonblood. Gritting her teeth against a scream, she pushed deeper, her arm disappearing into the stone up to the elbow. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined, a grinding, tearing agony that threatened to shred her sanity. She felt it then, a rhythmic, sluggish pulse deep within the altar. The stone's heart. Her fingers brushed against something that was not rock. It was smooth, warm, and it pulsed with a malevolent, dark energy. The bloodstone. Wrapping her fingers around it, she pulled. The world screamed. A wave of raw, magical power erupted from the altar. The standing stones hummed with a deafening vibration. The very air grew thin and sharp. The shadow beast let out a shriek of rage and agony as its anchor was ripped from its foundation. With a final, desperate heave, Arya pulled the bloodstone free. It was a chunk of obsidian, shot through with veins of pulsing crimson light, and it was hot enough to melt steel. The moment it cleared the altar, the ancient pact was broken. The curse, a torrent of untethered, raw power that had been bound for centuries, was free, and it surged toward the only available anchor left. Her. It slammed into her, a tidal wave of pure darkness. She felt her bones crack, her veins ignite. The silver light of her moonblood flared, fighting a desperate, losing battle against the flood of crimson. She was giving up her humanity, her very life to become the curse's new prison. She was saving him, but she was damning herself. As the darkness consumed her, she heard Cain howl in despair, and from the edge of consciousness, she heard Damon, finally stirring, scream her name. Chapter 18. An Echo of Silence. The darkness that flooded Arya was absolute. It was 1,000 years of rage, 1,000 years of pain, 1,000 years of cursed bloodlust, all pouring into a vessel that was never meant to contain it. She felt her own life force, the silver fire of her moonblood being extinguished, snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. Her body was a battlefield, and it was being torn apart from the inside. A violent tremor shook her, and she collapsed backward, the hot, pulsing bloodstone falling from her grasp and rolling onto the grass. Strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Through a darkening haze, she looked up. Damon. He was awake, kneeling over her, his golden eyes clear and sharp for the first time, free of the curse's maddening influence. And they were filled with a horror so profound it eclipsed everything else. The curse was gone from him, but the price was her. "Arya! No, what did you do?" he pleaded, his voice a broken, ragged thing she had never heard before. He pulled her tight against his chest, as if he could hold her together through sheer force of will. Her vision was tunneling, the edges blurring into a soft, quiet gray. The sounds of the world, the whimpers of the wounded elders, the sorrowful whine of Cain, the whisper of the wind, were all fading into a distant roar. The only thing left was him. His face stripped of every wall, every guard, every last vestige of the cold alpha. All she saw now was Damon, and he was weeping. "You're free," she whispered, the words a faint puff of air. It was getting so hard to breathe. Her arm, the one that had borne the sigil, was now turning to ash, the skin flaking away to reveal not bone, but shimmering, fading starlight. "I don't want it," he sobbed, his tears splashing onto her face. They felt warm. "Not without you. Please, Arya, don't leave me. I can't do this alone. Don't leave me." She lifted a trembling hand, her fingers feeling heavy and distant. She touched his cheek, a final, gentle caress. She saw the wolf from her dream in his eyes, the one who had pleaded with her not to go. She saw the man who had tasted of such loneliness in his kiss. She had healed his grief, but had left him with a new, more terrible one. A strange, serene peace settled over her. She had made her choice. Her mother had died running from the pack's cruelty, but she had died fighting for its alpha. She had not been weak. "It's okay," she murmured, her voice fading to nothing. "You're safe." Her last sensation was the feeling of his love, a desperate, unconditional wave of it that she had unknowingly craved her entire life. It was a beautiful thing to feel at the end. Her last sight was of his golden eyes, wide with a love that was just dawning and a grief that would last an eternity. Then her world went silent, and she fell into a soft, welcoming darkness. From her fading perspective, she felt his body convulse with a sound of pure animalistic heartbreak. It was a sound of a soul being ripped in half, a sound worse than any scream the curse had ever torn from him. He held her lifeless body to his chest, his control shattered, his power meaningless, his freedom a bitter poison. He was utterly and completely broken. And as Arya's last, faint breath ghosted into the cold night air, the great blood moon in the sky above, which had begun to recede to a pale silver, stopped. It pulsed once, hard. Then, with a sudden malevolent surge, it flooded with a red more intense, more evil than before. Her sacrifice hadn't ended the curse. It had only changed the rules of the game. Chapter 19. Between Worlds. The world had ended. Damon knew this with a certainty that was as cold and final as the stone beneath his knees. He held the cooling body of Arya in his arms, her head resting against his chest, where a heart no longer capable of feeling anything continued to beat. The air was gray. The blood-red moonlight was a meaningless smear in a sky devoid of stars. The whimpers of the injured elders, the terrified silence of the emissary, it was all a distant, buzzing noise from a world he no longer belonged to. She was gone. He had won her freedom, and in doing so, had lost the only thing that made his own freedom worth having. He had finally broken the curse, only to be cursed with a grief so absolute it was its own kind of living death. He lowered his head, pressing his forehead against hers, breathing in the last fading scent of her, wild herbs and courage, and a life extinguished too soon. He was ready for the end, ready for the darkness to take him too. She is not gone. The voice was not a sound. It was a thought, a feeling as clear and calm as starlight, cutting through the thick, suffocating fog of his despair. It was Cain, Not the raging beast, not the tormented prisoner, but his other half, his spirit, now a distinct and separate consciousness joined with his own. Damon's head snapped up, his eyes searching the darkness. What? Her body has failed, Kane explained, his presence a soothing silver light in the ruin of Damon's mind. But her soul, her moonblood, it created a shield. The curse could not consume her essence. She is adrift, trapped in the void between the living world and the spirit realm. The thread of our bond is all that anchors her. I can feel it. Faint. But it is there. A single, impossible spark of hope ignited in the vast, cold emptiness of his soul. It was a tiny, fragile thing, but it was enough. How? Damon whispered aloud, his voice raw. How do we bring her back? The cost was relayed in another silent rush of understanding from the wolf. The untethered curse, the raw power she had pulled into herself was now a storm without a lightning rod. To pull her soul back, a new anchor was needed. He, Damon, would have to take the curse back. Not the chained bloodline version, but the raw, elemental power of it. He would have to become the vessel, willingly. And to make the bond between them strong enough to serve as a bridge across the void, he had to mark her. A true, final, Alpha's mark. The very act he had sworn on Livia's grave he would never again perform. He looked down at Arya's pale, beautiful face. There was no hesitation. There was no choice. A life without her was no life at all. He would burn for 1,000 years to give her one more breath. He gently shifted her in his arms, tilting her head to expose the pale, unblemished skin of her neck, where the silver ghost of a mark still faintly shimmered. He could feel the raw, chaotic energy of the curse radiating from the fallen bloodstone nearby, calling to him, promising oblivion. He welcomed it. "I'm coming for you, Arya," he murmured, his voice thick with a resolve that was stronger than any fear. "Hold on." He lowered his head, his canines extending. He inhaled her scent one last time, a promise and a prayer. Then, as the raw power of the curse leaped from the stone and began to sear his skin like 1,000 white-hot needles, he bit down. It was not a claim of possession. It was not the act of a cursed beast. It was a sacrament of pure, unconditional love. Pain, brilliant and blinding, erupted through him as the curse and the bond and his own soul fused into one. He was forging a bridge of agony and devotion, and he would not let go. Chapter 20. The Trinity Knot Pain was the new reality. It was a white-hot, roaring inferno that consumed every part of Damon's being. He had willingly invited the raw, untethered curse back into his soul, and it was shredding him from the inside out. He was no longer a man containing a beast. He was a mortal shell trying to contain a supernova. He held Arya's body tight against his, the new bloody mark on her neck now glowing with a furious crimson light, the terminus of the bridge he had just built. His own body felt like it was dissolving into ash and fire. "Do not fight it," Kane's voice echoed, a calm, silver anchor in the crimson storm. "You are the vessel. I am the guide. She is the heart. We must not fight it. We must channel it." Channel it? It was like being told to channel an avalanche. But through the agony, he understood. The curse was just power, chaotic, destructive, but power nonetheless. Arya's moonblood was its opposite, calm, creative, a power of healing. And Kane, his wolf spirit, was the conduit that could flow between them. A trinity: man, wolf, and Luna. They were 3 fractured parts of a whole, and this was their only chance to become one. With the last of his strength, Damon shifted, laying Arya gently on the grass before kneeling over her. He pressed his forehead to hers, skin to skin. He placed one hand over the fresh mark on her neck and the other over her still heart. Then, he let go. He surrendered. He dropped every wall, every ounce of control he had spent a lifetime building. He opened the floodgates of his soul, and allowed the raw, world-breaking power of the curse to surge through him. It was a torrent of red and black energy, a river of pure rage that threatened to sweep him away into oblivion. "Now!" Cain commanded. At the same time, the shimmering, starlit form of the spirit wolf rose from within Damon's consciousness. Cain's physical essence, a being of pure moonlight, flowed out of Damon and into the bond, a second river of silver and white light that rushed to meet the crimson torrent of the curse. The two streams of power collided within the bond that connected Damon and Arya. They did not cancel each other out. Instead, they began to weave together, a violent, chaotic dance of creation. Red and silver, shadow and starlight, rage and serenity, all twisting into a single unified helix of unimaginable energy. Damon screamed as the combined power surged through him, through the mark, and poured into Arya's lifeless body. He was the conduit. He was the ground wire for a lightning strike that could remake the world or shatter it into dust. He felt his own consciousness begin to fray, to dissolve, blending with the calm wisdom of the wolf and the fierce, loving spirit of the woman beneath him. He was no longer just Damon. They were no longer just three separate beings. A sphere of swirling, incandescent light erupted from their point of contact. It was a miniature galaxy of crimson and silver, a vortex of raw magic that expanded rapidly, consuming the altar, the bloodstone, and the bodies of the fallen. The light pushed back against the oppressive red glow of the blood moon, a brilliant, defiant dawn in the heart of the cursed night. The remaining elders cried out, shielding their eyes from the blinding, divine power. Inside the light, there was no pain. There was no man, no wolf, no woman. There was only a single, unified consciousness being woven together from three threads. A trinity knot, pulled tight in a crucible of magic and love, an act of creation so profound it was indistinguishable from total annihilation. Chapter 21. The First Breath. The light faded as gently as it had erupted violently. It receded from the edges of the clearing, pulling back into the two figures at the center of the altar stone, finally winking out of existence with a soft, final sigh. The world that was revealed in its wake was a world transformed. The oppressive, blood-red moon was gone. In its place, a clean, peaceful, silver-white moon shone down, bathing the hilltop in a gentle, healing glow. The air, once thick with the scent of blood and burnt magic, was now crisp and clean, like the air after a cleansing thunderstorm. On the ground, the malevolent bloodstone, the anchor of 1,000 years of pain, had crumbled into a pile of inert gray dust. Damon knelt in the center of it all, his head bowed. The agonizing fire of the curse was gone. The screaming torment in his soul was silenced. For the first time in his adult life, he felt whole. He reached into his own mind and found Cain, not as a separate voice or a raging prisoner, but as a calm, steady presence, perfectly integrated with his own consciousness. They were one. The man and the wolf, finally at peace, a partnership of equals. His heart, however, was still a cold, heavy stone in his chest. Had it worked? Was the price of his own wholeness her life? Then he felt a twitch in the arms that held her. He looked down. Arya's form, which had been as still and pale as marble, was suffused with a soft, internal luminescence. The ashen gray of her skin was receding, replaced by the warm, living flush of life. The network of crimson cracks faded, and in their place, a beautiful, intricate pattern of silver lines spread across her skin, like tree roots or river deltas, glowing with a soft, steady light. A matching pattern, he realized with a start, now adorned his own arms. They were marked by their shared miracle. Her eyelids fluttered. With a sharp, sudden gasp, she took her first new breath. Her eyes opened, and she looked up at him. They were the same deep, defiant brown he had fallen in love with, but now they were flecked with luminous silver starlight. She blinked, her expression shifting from confusion to a dawning, wondrous recognition. She looked at him, and he knew, with a certainty that went beyond words, that she was seeing all of him, the man and the wolf. and there was no fear in her gaze. Only love. He could feel it. He could feel her. Her awe, her relief, her overwhelming love for him, all of it echoed inside his own heart as if it were his own emotion. The bond was no longer a thread. It was a vast open bridge. "Damon," she whispered, her voice clear and strong. She lifted a hand and touched the silver markings on his arm, her own glowing in response. "Cain." She smiled, a true, brilliant smile. "You're both quiet." "We are at peace," he replied, his voice thick with an emotion too vast for a single word. He helped her to her feet, their movements perfectly in sync. They stood together, hand in hand, two halves made whole, their shared power a calm, humming aura around them. The curse had not been destroyed. It had been redeemed, transformed from a poison into a wellspring of balanced power, tempered by moonblood and spirit. Around them, the surviving elders and the council emissary stared, their faces a mask of stunned, terrified awe. They had witnessed an impossibility, a death and a rebirth, the creation of something new, something more powerful than their ancient laws could comprehend. Led by an instinct older than any rule, one of the elders slowly, hesitantly, dropped to one knee, then another, and another. Soon, every remaining wolf on that hilltop, including the humbled council emissary, was kneeling. They knelt not just before their redeemed alpha, but before the silver-veined woman who had walked through the valley of death and returned as their true Luna. Chapter 22. A Mark of Gold. The morning air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and the collective electric anticipation of the entire Black Moon pack. They were gathered on the great lawn before the keep, a sea of wolves in their human forms, their faces turned upward. They were not looking at the keep, but at the path leading down from the sacred hill. The council emissary stood apart, his expression unreadable, a silent witness to the dawn of a new era. There was no fear in the air today. There was only wonder. Damon and Arya descended the path together, not as an alpha and his consort, but as two partners, their steps perfectly in sync. He wore no formal alpha's regalia, only simple black leathers. She wore a simple gown of forest green, her hair unbound. The intricate silver-veined patterns on their arms shimmered in the morning sun, a visible testament to the miracle they had forged. They did not stop at the dais set up for them, but walked into the heart of the crowd, meeting the eyes of their people. When Damon spoke, his voice was not the rumbling command of a cursed leader, but the clear, steady tone of a man made whole. It carried across the lawn, imbued with a quiet power that commanded more respect than any roar ever had. "For generations, your alpha has carried a curse," he began, his golden eyes sweeping over his pack. "I carried it, as my father did before me. It made me a creature of control, of fear, of isolation. I built walls around my heart and called it strength. I was wrong." He turned his gaze to Arya, and the love in his eyes was so profound, so absolute, that a reverent hush fell over the pack. "This woman," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he took her hand, "came to us as a servant, a ghost in our halls. But she had a strength I never knew, a strength born not of control, but of courage. She saw the man behind the monster, the wolf behind the cage. She walked into the fire when all others fled." He recounted the events on the hilltop, omitting none of his own failings and none of her heroism. He told them of her moonblood, not as a strange magic, but as a gift of healing and balance. He told them how she had taken the curse into herself, sacrificing her own life to set him free, an act of love so pure it had rewritten their destiny. "She is not my Luna by contract or by conquest," he declared, his voice ringing with pride. "She is my fated mate, my other half, the savior of our pack and the anchor of my soul. Today, I do not claim her. I honor her." He turned to her, and in the bright morning light, he knelt, an alpha, kneeling before his Luna in front of the entire pack. It was a gesture of such profound respect that it shattered 1,000 years of tradition. He gently took her hand and pressed his lips to the silver veins on her skin. "Arya Vale," he murmured, for her ears only. "My heart is yours. My wolf is yours. My life is yours. Will you accept this mark, not as a chain, but as a promise?" "Always," she whispered, her heart overflowing. He rose, and with a tenderness that made the air shimmer, he lowered his head to her neck. This time, there was no pain, no desperation. It was a bite of reverence, of devotion, of two souls formally acknowledging the unity they had already forged in magic and blood. The moment his teeth pressed into her skin, a light erupted from the mark. It was not the angry red of the curse or the ethereal silver of her moonblood. It was a brilliant, warm, and steady gold, like the heart of the sun. The light flowed from the mark, enveloping them both in a breathtaking aura. It was the color of their new magic, balanced, whole, pure. A single tentative howl rose from the crowd. It was joined by another, and another, until the entire Black Moon pack lifted their voices in a deafening, joyous chorus that echoed off the mountains, a song of a new beginning. Chapter 23. The Balance of Scars. Later, as twilight painted the sky in soft hues of lavender and rose, they walked. Hand in hand, they ascended the path to the sacred hill, the joyous sounds of the pack's celebration fading behind them. A gentle peace had settled over the lands, a quiet that felt earned. The air up here was different, clean and thin, whispering through the ancient standing stones. The hilltop was no longer a place of horror. The great altar stone at its center was shattered, its pieces lying like the bones of a long-dead beast, already being reclaimed by moss and creeping vines. The blood-soaked grass was growing green again. The place felt cleansed, its violent history washed away by the tide of their sacrifice and rebirth. They stopped at the center of the stone circle, looking out over the vast expanse of their territory, the lights of the keep beginning to twinkle in the valley below. For a long time, they said nothing, simply breathing in the shared silence. The bond between them was a calm, steady river, a constant, comforting awareness of the other's presence. "It's strange," Arya said softly, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. "To stand here and feel peace." Damon squeezed her hand, his thumb tracing the glowing silver patterns on her skin. "Everything I ever was," he murmured, his gaze distant, "was about fighting what was inside me, pushing it down, caging it." He looked at her, his golden eyes clear and filled with a quiet wonder. "With you, there's no fight. Cain isn't a beast to be tamed. He's just me. And he is at peace, because you are here." She leaned her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady, unified thump-thump of his heart. It was her rhythm, too. "I spent my whole life trying to be invisible," she confessed. "Hiding what I was, who my mother was. I thought freedom meant running away and being alone." "And now?" he asked. "Now, I know freedom is this," she said, looking at their joined hands. "It's standing your ground, with someone who sees all of your scars and isn't afraid of them. Someone who has scars of their own." She gently touched the new golden mark on her neck. It was a beautiful, intricate spiral, a permanent symbol of their bond. It no longer felt like a brand, but a piece of art they had created together. The first stars of the evening began to appear in the darkening sky, and a clean white crescent moon rose above the mountains. It was no longer a source of terror, but simply a beautiful lamp in the darkness. It held no power over them now. They had forged their own destiny, one that was not dictated by the color of the moon or the sins of their ancestors. "The emissary left this afternoon," Damon said, breaking the silence. "He said the council will be sending a formal proclamation, recognizing our new kind of bond. They're afraid of it, but they respect it." "Let them be afraid," Arya said with a small smile. "It's not their story. It's ours." He turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. He looked at her, truly looked at her, with all the love and reverence he had held back for a lifetime. "I'm sorry, Arya," he whispered, "for all the pain, for the words I used to make you run." "You did what you thought you had to do to protect me," she replied, her own voice thick with emotion. "And I did what I had to do to come back to you. We're balanced." He lowered his head and kissed her. It was a kiss of profound peace, of quiet promises and a shared future. It was a kiss between two survivors, two partners, two souls who had walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed but whole. Together they stood on the ruins of their painful past, ready to build a new life on the foundation of their love. Chapter 24. 2 Heartbeats. 2 months passed like a peaceful, flowing river. The Black Moon Pack thrived under its new leadership. The darkness that had haunted the keep for a generation was gone, replaced by a sense of hope and security that trickled down from the Alpha and Luna to the smallest pup. Damon was a different leader, still strong and decisive, but now tempered with a quiet compassion that Arya had unlocked in him. Kane's wisdom was a constant, calm presence, guiding his decisions. Arya, for her part, had stepped into her role as Luna as if she were born for it. She was not a distant, decorative figurehead. She was the heart of the pack. She mediated disputes with an empathy that soothed even the most stubborn warriors. She oversaw the welfare of the families, her own childhood of neglect, making her fiercely protective of the pack's young. She was loved, not for a title she held, but for the person she was. The servant girl who had been invisible was now seen and cherished by all. Their life together was a quiet miracle. They would spend their evenings in the study, not with him pacing and her in fearful silence, but with them sitting together by the fire, reading from the ancient texts, their legs tangled together. The bond was a constant, warm hum between them, a silent conversation of shared thoughts and emotions that was more intimate than any words. He no longer had nightmares of a crimson moon, and she no longer dreamed of running. They had found their home in each other. One bright, clear morning, Arya stood on the balcony of their chambers, a soft breeze rustling the leaves of the great oak tree that grew in the courtyard. She watched the life of the pack unfold below, the clang of steel from the training yard, the laughter of pups playing tag on the lawn, the scent of baking bread wafting from the kitchens. It was a symphony of ordinary, beautiful life. Lately, she had been feeling different. A gentle, persistent fatigue that sleep never quite vanquished. Her senses, already sharp, had become even more acute. She could smell the rain on the wind long before the clouds gathered. She could feel the subtle shifts in the pack's mood as if they were her own. She had chalked it up to the final settling of her new, balanced power. But this morning, there was something else. A quiet, deep awareness in her own body. A feeling of fullness. She placed a hand on her flat stomach, a thoughtful, subconscious gesture. She closed her eyes, turning her senses inward, past the hum of her own life force, past the warm, steady river of her bond with Damon and Kane. She reached deeper, into the quiet, sacred space within herself. And she found it. It was faint, a tiny, impossibly delicate flutter. A flicker of life as soft as a butterfly's wing. It was a pulse, a nascent energy that was separate from her own. It was a second heartbeat. Tiny, rhythmic, real. A sharp, incredulous gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes flew open, her hand pressing tighter against her stomach. Awe, so profound it made her dizzy, washed over her. It was followed by a flicker of the old fear, the fear of loss, of bringing a child into a world that could be so cruel, but it was instantly consumed by a wave of overwhelming, wondrous joy. This was not a child of a curse. This was not a child of a broken bloodline. This would be a child of moonblood and starlight, of sacrifice and redemption. A child born from a love that had defied death itself. A slow, brilliant smile spread across her face as she looked out at the thriving world they had built. Her legacy wasn't just in healing a broken alpha or saving a pack. It was here, just beginning, a tiny secret promise of the future. Every curse, she thought, a tear of pure happiness tracing a path down her cheek, was once a love story misunderstood.